Hey everybody, it's the Commodore from the Clan of the Grey Wolf, and you are watching this week's installment of the Weekly Wringer here on clanofthegraywolf.com. So let's see, what's today going to be about? We're going today to wrap up last week's question about the new, well, I guess it really is about the Google new Chrome Top laptop, or the Nettop, as it were. But it's really more about the concept of the Nettop and what you guys thought about that. I will get into that and kind of rehash it a little bit, see what's gone on with some of the contributions from the community on that. I'll give my own thoughts, as I always do. And then I will move on to a question for next week, which has to do with some of our favorite video game universe settings. So here we go. So let's see. First things first, definitely want to say that you guys had a great amount of response in terms of the long format questions I had last time. I didn't even mean them to be necessarily questions about whether you would still continue to watch with the long format. I'm just glad to know that you guys aren't put off by it, so I don't have to feel like I need to be under 20 minutes to make it interesting. I can just kind of speak my mind, and you guys are there to listen. So thanks for the response on that. I'm definitely taking that into consideration, and hopefully won't have to talk as fast as I have been on some of these videos as a result. So good to know you're out there listening. Let's see. A few things I wanted to talk about that before I get right back into the question from last week. Seth Zero wanted to say thanks for the acknowledgement. Glad you're on board with us. In regard to the PlayStation argument, and really anything that we talk about here on the Weekly Wringer, you made a comment about how we dealt with it with intelligence and we dealt with it factually. There's going to be a lot of opinion that gets thrown around in the Weekly Wringer. That's always going to be a part of what we do. That's why it's fun. That's why I wanted to have this series. But I'm proud of the fact that we're going to bring a certain level of intelligence and we're going to bring a certain level of an elevated conversation to each and every topic we talk about here. So I'm glad that you've noticed. We're going to continue that trend. I really don't like, any more than you guys do, when people just kind of throw crap out there that isn't backed up or it doesn't have some kind of semblance of reality going along with it. So I'm not going to do that here. I appreciate that you guys don't do that in responding to the videos, and I'm glad you pointed it out. And you mentioned us being around for a lot longer. We're not going anywhere. Some of you have probably seen Rue's video from this week. We're not going anywhere. There are some changes on the horizon. I will say that for myself moving forward. I'm not going to spoil that, though. I'll tell you what those changes will be when I know more about them. But we're not going anywhere, guys. This is going to be a series that I don't intend to drop anytime soon. The website and the Clan of the Grey Wolf isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So stay put and keep contributing to the community, because the community is really what it's all about. And we're thrilled that you guys are here. So we're not going anywhere. Let's see, Male White Mage wanted to say, glad I can be your audience not only to you, but also to your cat. I'm not a cat person. I'm a dog person, but if I'm going to be if I'm going to have an audience of a cat, then I'm happy that it is on an internet video and not in person, because I happen to be very allergic to cats. So I'm glad that I can be that your cat is an active and captive audience to the Weekly Wringer as well. And I also wanted to say a thanks to Ninto55 for the creative and appreciation of my hug comment from last week. Definitely laughed out loud when I read that, especially the part about the Lay's chips at the end. I definitely laughed out loud when I read that. So I just wanted to let you guys know that. All right, now let's get into the conversation from last week, which I talked about. I'll just key it up for folks that maybe didn't watch last week. So Google had their I/O, excuse me, their I/O summit 2 weeks ago now, which really introduced a lot of the things that Google is cooking on and thinking about in terms of the future of technology, according to them. One of the things that they have launched now, which has been long in, I guess, development and rumored to be in development, is a Chrome-based, and not, I don't mean Chrome browser, I mean Chrome operating system, which essentially is the same thing. If you really want to get down to brass tacks, one just has a kernel in it, and the other is simply just a browser. But so it's a Chrome-based laptop that doesn't have any local storage for things like local applications or data. What it does have is just a Chrome web-facing interface. Boots up in seconds. In fact, there really isn't much of a boot process at all. It really actually just boots in literally, just a few seconds, and is ready to run because it doesn't have any advanced functions. It doesn't do a lot of the things that we take for granted, which is part of the reason why I wanted to talk about it. It's supposed to be a bit of a paradigm shift. Theoretically, they think everything you can do that you would want to do with a laptop online, and that's why they've released it. So I love what some of you talked about in terms of labeling it the Chrome Top. I think that's a good name for it. I think that's what I'm going to focus on because I don't like the idea of Nettop. That's an Engadget term, and I'm not necessarily a big fan of it. So I'm going to call it a Chrome Top, or we'll just call it the Chrome Laptop or the CR48, which I think is what it was in terms of development. All right, so now that you have a little bit of background, the question that I asked was, what do you see for the future of this format of the Chrome Top or the Nettop box? And there were several of you that brought up some really interesting thoughts. I'll just kind of get to some of the generalities, and then I'll launch into some of the specifics. In general, I think you all saw some promise with this concept. Whether or not you thought it was the future of computing or not is a different story. But you saw some, I think most people, there were a few of you that did not, a few that just said this is a ridiculous idea that's inexorably going to fail. But I think most of you out there really saw some promise with the platform and are interested to see how it gets implemented in the future. I think that's probably honestly the best anybody could say right now from Google or anyone else. It is really just a tremendous proof of concept at the moment, and once people understand what it does and how they can use it, I think they'll be very excited by it. So let's get to some of the specifics that you guys talked about in the discussion last week. Mr. K talked about the concept of ownership. I think it's an interesting one. Once I purchase something like Microsoft Word, for example, I pay a lot of money for it because Microsoft does charge a lot of money, even if you're a student. And then I have that program, and for whatever computer I ever use from that point on, I own, for better or worse, that copy. Really what I own is a key, because the software itself, although I can't tinker with it by law, is mine, that I can utilize then with my own key to be able to have a license for that software to use as I see fit. Okay, cool, I get it. That's the traditional paradigm, right? The ownership gets a little dicey when you're using something else. So for example, if I'm using now Google Docs to do a Word function, like if I'm having word processing function online, then what does the ownership really go to? And I think it's a very valid question. There are probably a lot of different ways to think about it. There's a legal ramifications of it. There are also just kind of simple privacy issues, who owns it, who doesn't. And then if it got down to brass tacks and I really needed a document, then who owns it? How do I get to it? Do I just own it on a document by document basis? Now, guys, you all know you can get a cloud-based version that you yourself could own, right? So if you have a company and you want to run Google Docs, you can get the Google Suite and you can actually run it on your local cloud. You don't have to run it in the public cloud, right? So I wanted to make that very clear. It seems like some of you missed that little nuance with talking about the concept too. But here's the piece of advice from the end of Mr. K's post. Keep the programs local. Fair enough, okay? I think we are at a position in this point in time where that's probably a fair assessment. There's a lot of things that I do locally that I don't mind that I do locally. That being said, guys, the thing that I want you all to remember throughout this, and some of you missed this little subtle nuance, I didn't ask you about computing in general, right? I didn't ask you about necessarily even what your phones do. What I asked about was, this is a laptop, right? Now what we've traditionally thought of a laptop is just a miniature version of your desktop computer. It has limited functionality for what your desktop can do, but it also has maybe a little bit of extended functionality. It's mobile. It has a different job. My question really centered around the idea of, could you do that limited job with those functions that are limited and mobile being completely and totally web-based? And that's the question I think we all have to answer here. So before I get into my answer, I want to get through a couple more of the contributions from the community. So I think but I just wanted to bring that together. That's really what the question I think we have to answer today. So let's see. Triple 10X talked about bloatware. Fantastic point. One of the reasons the traditional paradigm functions the way that it does is because Microsoft and Apple, for all of you Mac heads out there, this is no different. Okay, just forget the merits of the operating system, the fact that they have a tremendous amount of user base. That means that they can sell a spot inside of their operating system that will be launched with their computers that are unnecessary for function, but for a price and for marketing purposes, they'll include, right? This is the whole point of why Microsoft got sued in antitrust cases almost a decade ago about Internet Explorer, right? And why you still have to, in Europe, Internet Explorer cannot be shipped with any copy of any operating system. Because it absolutely is forbidden there to be able to bundle that in. That should be a choice that people have to make. And indeed, that has to be a choice that gets made on a consumer-by-consumer basis. The point is, guys, I think if we talk about bloatware, it's a good point because that's a significant amount of revenue generation for the operating system companies like Microsoft and Apple that develop operating systems. Not so much a problem for you Linux folks, and I know you're all jumping up and down screaming right now. Bloatware is generally not an issue with Linux because Linux is almost always kind of dropped in razor thin. It just kind of drops in with what's necessary, and you can add to whatever you want to add to it later on. Acknowledged. But here's what I want to say before I dig too deep into that rat hole, which would go on forever. Guys, the concept of bloatware doesn't make sense with this new paradigm, which is the whole point, right? So Google is banking on the fact, because they can't stand, they're tired of the traditional paradigm of operating systems, which Microsoft and Apple operate with, and that's why the Chrome concept is there. The Chrome concept eliminates that idea of bloatware. Google is basically saying, why are we having these laptops ship with these operating systems full of garbage software that no one uses and inevitably, if anybody has any brains, will remove from their system. And for those people that don't, they'll go and use that software, and then, God only knows what ends up happening. I've seen some pretty nasty examples, I'm sure many of you out there who are technology savvy and have helped people with their computers know about. Have seen some examples too. But, so I just think we have to, what Google's trying to do here, guys, is change the paradigm. So bloatware really becomes an irrelevant conversation because Google is basically saying bloatware is out there and we can eliminate it and we don't need it as a revenue stream. That's compelling. I think that's a compelling argument. So, good point, but I think there's another interesting piece of the puzzle here that we've missed with bloatware. Let's see. SMU, great contribution with the web-based Linux distro. Yeah, check that out. Sent that to some people that would be in the know about it and would be interested in it, as I definitely was. Tremendous potential there. I just love what's going on with that project, and I'm interested to see kind of what that can be laid out in terms of the cloud concept. And the fact is that it's browser-based and not that it's cloud-based that makes it so cool. So if you have your local cloud, let's say just at your home, right? You have a home cloud, let's say, and then you run all of this stuff in it. And one of them happens to be a virtualized PC that you could access from a browser from any machine. Then guess what? Mr. Chrome laptop could have, theoretically, any function of a normal PC just hosted at the cloud, which makes things a heck of a lot more secure, which makes them a heck of a lot more reliable than your normal PC hardware, which has to function separately. I see this every day, guys. This is the stuff that goes on. But SMU made another tremendous point that I want to point out. Users will always demand computers that are easier to use. I thought that was tremendous insight. There is no question that right now there is an infusion of geeks out there that love to take the bare bones Linux distributions, whatever they can get their hands on, Android, which is just a Linux variation, right? All of these different pieces of the puzzle that they can get, and they just want to be able to modify the hell out of it, make it into whatever they want to make it into, and then just go with it. That is That's a big part.